I really do appreciate this invitation to come and speak. I would think, so I've been here for 3 years now, coming up on March 6th. And I figured I probably would never get invited to this association meeting because in my interview, the question was, you're in central South Dakota, you got herbicide resistant weeds, what can you do? And I said, what about prescription tillage? That was not the right answer. So again, I'm really humbled to be invited here. Anthony Bly, maybe you know of him. He's kind of into no-till agriculture with the university. I told him I was coming here, a little nervous based on that backstory. He's like, just tell them what they need to hear. And I was like, we can do that. We can do that. Weed management, I would say for most of us is going to start at the nozzle, right, with herbicides. We're doing other things to help manage these weeds. But when you're farming or, managing, scouting thousands of acres, walking that section's probably not going to be efficient nor economic. But there's something new that's going to happen starting this year that's going to really change how we use herbicides. Not so much like if we're using a mixture, spraying pre, spraying post, but before we even turn that boom on. And I'm going to intermittently go to all three screens, so I'm not trying to just keep about each one. But the thing that's going to change how we use herbicides is the EPA herbicide strategy. Anyone heard of this? It's been in talks since I think 2023. So it's been in talks, but now this year in 2026 is when we're going to actually become more familiar with it, if you will. Now, if you're at this meeting right now, I would argue that you're already a conservationist. But what this strategy is trying to do, in broad terms, is keep that herbicide where you spray it so there's not off-target movement, off-target damage to sensitive plants, animals, so on and so forth. By means of spray drift management, runoff management, and then also like the PULAs, which stands for the Pesticide Use Limitation, coupled with the Endangered Species Act. I would say we're all trying to do that when we spray herbicides, especially if you're at this meeting, right? You're probably a conservationist. But this is now going to be integrated into the label, and label's law. If you're going to spray the herbicide, you have to follow that label, or there can be legal repercussions. Well, if we think about herbicide labels pre-2026, there was already a lot of that language on the label, right? Don't spray when it's 30-mile-an-hour wind, right? If you have a sensitive area, don't spray by it. But the thing that's really going to change for 2026, must accumulate points before you spray that herbicide. What are these points? Now, these points are going to be mitigation measures brought forth by the EPA, and there is a whole laundry list. If you go to this epa.gov/pesticides mitigation-menu. The one thing I want to bring up right now, and if you take anything away from this today, this is what I want you to take away from. So this is the No-Till Association. We're going to talk about 2 mitigation relief points, what we're going to get by simply stepping into the field. The first one is going to be a county-based mitigation relief. And that's based on your soil type, slopes, things like that. So it's a broad classification based on your county. There's, math was never my strong suit, 64 counties in South Dakota that automatically get 2 points just by farming in that county. So we get 2 points. There's the exception for 3, but for the most part, it's going to apply to all of us, 2 points. The next one being The no-till association, you get points for tillage. No-till, you get 3 points. So just by what I call showing up or stepping foot in that field, you acquire 5 points. These point systems are going to be based on 3 being the lowest and 9 being the highest. Just by showing up and farming in South Dakota for this group, we're going to get 5 points. If you have an area with, conservation tillage, it drops you down to 4. But we're still getting points, right? This is new, but I want to kind of convey that it's going to be new and maybe we need to think a little bit, but it's not going to really change drastically how we use these products. Now this website right here is great. It's going to have, it's probably 16 plus pages of just practices and how you can get the points. I strongly advise if you're going to spray herbicides, or at least become familiar with herbicides, you visit this website and at least get somewhat familiar with it. Get familiar with it. But that being said, the second thing I want you all to take from this, because we're kind of in a technology world, not the best with technology. Anybody ever been to like some sort of an EPA website or look at a label on the computer? Is it easy, or is there a lot of information that's getting thrown at you? The next thing I want you to take away from this is my little trick, the Control F. So you press Control and F on your keyboard. You're going to get this search bar. And whatever tactic or practice you want to look at specifically, you type it in there, hit enter. And it's going to show you every single instance where that term or keyword or whatever shows up in this document. It's going to help us navigate this much faster, right? We're already getting 5 points for showing up. Maybe you need 6. What could you do for that 1 point, right? Use this kind of as your guide, right? You navigate much faster. Some of this stuff, again, once you get familiar with it, it's going to help you navigate through this much faster. It's going to change how we use the herbicides, but this year there's only 2 products registered for it. That being said, this is going to change as herbicides get re-registered. Right, so the new for 2026, these are the 2 herbicides that have it. The first one's in list 1, 4 to 6 points required on that label. Based on our loam soils here in the state, we need 6 points to spray this herbicide. The other herbicide's Liberty Ultra, glufosinate, 3 points to spray it. Now how many points are we getting accumulated by just showing up and farming here in the state? So we don't need to really worry about trying to spray Liberty Ultra, right? We're already getting our points. But it's going to be a little bit different for something like in list 1. Why is there this difference in points? That's part of it, but what actually is happening is that these points are based on the chemical characteristics of each herbicide. So for example, the EPA has these very complex simulation models. You have the chemical characteristics of, let's say in list 1, or that 2,4-D-choline formulation. They take all that information, plug it into this model based on everything, soil types, slope, precipitation coming in, moving it away from this. That's how they're basing it. So products that have the potential to move more readily in the environment, it's going to take more points to spray these herbicides. Something like Liberty Ultra, where we spray this herbicide, that herbicide droplet touches the soil, binds to that soil particle, it's not going to be going anywhere. Something as more maybe soil mobile as this 2,4-D. The labels are also going to be a place we can look for some of these mitigation measures. Excuse me. The Enlist 1 label is probably going to be maybe more user-friendly. But there's still some questions about how we're going to use this. So for example, on the Enlist 1 label, Corteva's already pulled out some of those mitigation measures from the EPA that are most pertinent to this product, and that's how you're getting your points. But that being said, as this is the first year we're going to be spraying these herbicides, I do think we need to do this as an exercise to make sure we know how we're getting our points based on all of the mitigation measures. But for example, on the Enlist 1 label, right, based on our soil types, we need 6 points. All right, so let's see what the mitigation measures they give us say. First one is reduce the number of applications, right? The less amount of herbicide that goes into this area, the less likely it's gonna be moving around, right? So if we spray 1 time, we get 4 points, 2 times, 2 points, 3 times, no points, okay? Let's say you wanna spray this herbicide once. The next thing they take into account is the residue tillage management. So even if you're no-till or doing strip, ridge, or mulch till, you get 4 points. That's 8. We need 6. It's not gonna be that difficult to acquire these points. Maybe you need to do a follow-up application. You know, later flush of weeds come, you gotta spray them, keep that yield potential high. 2 applications, our 4 points is now reduced to 2. We're at 6 points. If you do need to spray it 3 times, we can start talking about other tactics that you need. Now this is just what's on the label. Again, you go to the website, it has more options you can use, and I don't want to get into that today, but what I'm trying to hit home is this is new, but I think we're already doing the things we need to do to get our points so we can use these herbicides the way we kind of always have. Now the Liberty Ultra label is not as user-friendly. There's a lot of text here. So it has all the examples of what you can use. That's where we need to use our exercise of starting to kind of sit down and make a list of where we're at, what kind of tillage we're doing. Do we have buffer strips, vegetative buffer strips, things like that. Again, Liberty Ultra only needs 3 points. Based on the overarching EPA measures, how many points do we have? 5. We're good to go. Not everywhere is going to be as lucky as us in here in South Dakota. I hate to say this, but I don't really care what they're doing elsewhere. I'm trying to take care of you all right now. It's not going to be as big of a barrier for us to spray these herbicides. So 3's the minimum, 9's the maximum, right? And it's going to be based off of the herbicide we spray. We get a lot of questions, and we're just starting to talk about this here is, well, there's only 2 herbicides, but how can we start getting these points, right? I think it'll also be a good exercise to just make notes of how you can get those maximum amount of points, right? Just to kind of hedge your bet and be ready, because this is also coming for insecticides and fungicides. How can we easily acquire these points? Let's just say we're all no-till. We're getting 5 points. Remember how I said sit down and make a list of all these points? You do that, whether it's on a sheet of paper or in Excel, you get a point. You're at 6. Now the other thing you can do is consult a technical expert. Someone with the NRCS, someone from University Extension, certified crop advisor. You get a point. That's at 7. Or you can also participate in a conservation program that's been developed by a technical expert. 2 points. You're at 8. There's a lot of other things. There's downslope vegetative ditches. So, you know, if you have ditches that border your field, you get a point. Some of these herbicide labels, if you don't irrigate, you get 3 points. There's a lot of things that we're doing. Oops. That's going to get us to those 9 points relatively easy. It's going to be new. It's going to take a little bit of thinking, but we're already doing it. And I strongly suggest you start making a list, even very basic, to start figuring out where you're at. Because this is going to be our learning year, right? 3 to 6 points, we can get that easy. But when we start needing more points, maybe a little bit more difficult. You know, and again, become familiar with this. This is going to be a valuable tool as we move forward. This EPA website. Remember that Control F, right? You get 5 points. Anything else, use your Control F on this to help find it. Now this is an interesting picture to put up for the No-Till Association, no? That's Dr. Hutton. I believe that's him, you know, looking at the old mold bore plow, inverting some soil. I hope we don't have to go to this. I really don't. And I know no one in here is thinking, yeah, we're going to go out to the shelter belt and go medieval on it with the chainsaw so we can get out Granddaddy's mold bore plow, right? But we also have some problems in the state that, dare I say, are really going to threaten the future of no-till farming. That problem or weed is going to be kochia. Really difficult to manage. There's ALS herbicide resistance, so Harmony, Pursuit, that's been around for a while. Students from Mitchell Tech, you know, that's way before your time. You know, I was about this tall when that started happening, right? Then we get into the glyphosate or Roundup Ready resistance. It makes it difficult, but there's other herbicides, right? What herbicide resistance is going to help? Or I guess what herbicide resistance would really threaten no-till farming? What are we using before we plant to manage that kochia? Sharpen? Anybody here ever use Sharpen pre-plant burn down? I see this, right? It kind of works, good, not great. Sharpen resistance has been confirmed in South Dakota. It's been up in Manitoba, came down to North Dakota, now it's here. So this was found in Spink County. So just to set this up, on the very far left, that's a non-treated plant. As you move to the right, this has all been sprayed with Sharpen out of 1 fluid ounce. I would say that's pretty scary, right? This is a non-treated, these have all been sprayed with Sharpen. And our susceptible's dead. All right, maybe you're thinking 1 fluid ounce, okay. We can go up to 2 fluid ounces. We'll spray our way out of this. The Spink County population is down here at the bottom. It starts with non-treated and goes all the way up to 100 fluid ounces. Now that picture is probably a little washed out, but none of those plants survived. Or excuse me, all of those plants survived. So about a gallon of Sharpen is not going to kill this kochia. You're not spraying your way out of it. I mean, I think this is it's a serious concern, right? And I don't want to say it's all over South Dakota. If I could spell, in Hughes County, we had stuff surviving 3 fluid ounces, 10 fluid ounces. Over by Watertown, stuff was surviving a fluid ounces. So it's probably going to be widespread before we know it. Should we even let these kochia emerge, right? Do we want them even to come up? What's the other popular activity that we do for kochia management? What about fall burn down or residual herbicides? Anybody familiar with that herbicide right there, the Valor? I call that the state's herbicide, right? Along with the past flower, you know, the state flower, state herbicides, probably Valor. A lot of fall Valor going out. Problem with that, and they've seen this up in North Dakota too, the reliance on few herbicides that are similar to Sharpen, right? Valor, Spartan, different active ingredients, but the same herbicide group. They kill the plant in the same manner. So even if you have Sharpen resistance, what we've been seeing is you've also have Valor resistance or Spartan resistance. Again, are we going to be able to spray our way out of this? It's a big issue. Well, I borrowed this data from our friends to the north of us at North Dakota State just to show that Valor resistance is real. I'd like to set this up for you. At the very top, we have susceptible plants, and at the very bottom, we have susceptible plants. The Mine Hot and Mohall, these are Sharpener Valor resistant. Spray them with 3 ounces of Valor with the seeds in this potting soil. 3 weeks later, this is what we see. Our susceptibles, not a lot of plants on the top and bottom. These pots right here are non-treated, so they just got water. But look at all that. You can't tell me that looks any different. And that's 3 ounces of Valor. And that's not even a fall application. That's getting contact with the seed right then and there. Doom and gloom? Let's look at another herbicide. Let's look at Zidua. Not as strong on the kochia, but it's a different herbicide group. Kills the plant in a different way than the Valor or Spartan. We spray 2.5 fluid ounces. Let's just look from the top to bottom. Susceptible, resistant, resistant, susceptible. We start seeing some plants getting managed. Now, if you were to go out, and I don't know the price on Zidua right now, but it's expensive. Probably wouldn't be happy with that, though. It's better. It's better than, dare I say, throwing your money away with spraying Valor if there's resistance. But for me, I like a 0 weed threshold. I don't like seeing any weeds. What do we got for options next? What if we just mixed them? Use something like Fierce. Have the Zidua and the Valor in there together, working complementary to each other. So that's Fierce at 6 ounces on the far right. No susceptible plants on the top or bottom. Then we look at our 2 resistant populations. There's a few plants, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying this is ironclad, but it's better. So what if we start using some mixtures? Right? I like to say when we use herbicides together, we're really increasing our horsepower than if we were to use them alone. And this exemplifies really well. Just Valor alone, not great. Zidua alone, not great. Both of them together, not bad. Now, I'm not saying Sharpen resistance or Valor resistance is all across the state, but I want to conceptualize it with this, right? What if we had just started using the mixture herbicides at the beginning rather than trying to chase this problem now and spend even more money? I want you to think about that for a second. So we're talking about chasing this problem. We've always used Valor or Spartan. Why? Because it's good, right? If we were just to start using Zidua, that'd be poor. But what's beats Valor? Anybody recognize that young man right there? I see him in the back looking around.
That's an old picture.
Yeah, but you know what? He's still young at heart, right, Dwayne?
Ask my wife.
And I use this with complete sincerity. So when I started, Dr. Beck and I, we had a little bit of correspondence, and we were talking about the Sharpen resistance. And it's a bad deal, right? But what they were doing out at the research farm was kind of what we've been preaching now, long before Valor even existed. So I love this quote from him. We utilize a lot of fall applied herbicides at Dakota Lakes, and mixtures were always a part of the program. So, Valor is relatively new, but I think we can use that sentiment. If you've ever been out to Dakota Lakes, there's not a whole lot of weeds. Couple the mixtures of herbicides, rotation, tactics, all of that stuff is really going to help us. I wish I could go through this treatment list and tell you what's going to work best or not, but I'd just like to convey we're working on it. So we're kind of going into the way back machine and just looking at what happens when we use herbicides from different groups, right? If I told someone here to apply Prowl H2O for their kochia management, I'd probably get laughed out of the room. But it's also cheap. What happens when we take something like Prowl and mix it with Metribuzin? Again, something that's by itself not great, right? Something like Trypsin. I think we have the tools in our toolbox. We've put this trial out this year. Hopefully we can start getting some answers for you. But as we go forward, I really want to harp this message of herbicide mixtures at every application. I truly think we're going to get better effectiveness. We're going to have some resistance management as well. And this isn't anything new, right? It's, what I would call fundamental weed management, but things got easy, right, with Roundup or just Valor. But, I said not everything is, resistant to the Sharpen or Valor in the state, but I just kind of want to conceptualize what's going on or could go on right now. So this is all the effective post-emergence options in corn. Things that have the blue on it, they just never worked. So we have a decent list, right? Now we're going to black out the resistances that we know we have here in South Dakota. All right, we lose the ALS herbicides, so things like permit, things like that. We're losing glyphosate, and we've also lost some of our PPO inhibitors, things that are related to Sharpen. We still got options, right? Now let's take this a step further. Let's think about every state that touches South Dakota. North Dakota, Minnesota, Nebraska, Iowa. Let's just throw up their resistances on there and see how many herbicides we have left. We'll have something, right? We got something. But we're chipping away at all of our effective options. Not to get too much into what herbicides we have, but we're relying on bromoxynil or Maestro. Again, not great by itself. Our Group 27s, our bleachers, our Lotus, our Callistos, things like that. Again, they're okay, but by themselves they're not. So if we start using them in the mixtures, better control, reduced resistance, evolution. Maybe you don't care about corn. What about soybean? Let's do this exercise in soybean as well. Set up exactly the same. Things that are in white, we got options. Let's take the South Dakota resistances. Ooh, starts to dwindle down a bit. Take it that step further. Let's put in the resistances from states that touch South Dakota. Because let's be real, this weed moves, right? It breaks off, it tumbles. So just because we may be feeling good that we have our fields under control, this stuff moves in. Oh. Ooh. Liberty, just one herbicide left. Again, it's not saying this is where we're at right now, but I want to illustrate that it's going to be a serious problem, right? If we don't start using these herbicides in mixtures and things like that. But what's going on in South Dakota? We have started an initiative to actually start documenting what herbicide resistance profiles, water hemp, kochia, palmer amaranth here in the state. From my understanding, there has not been a statewide herbicide resistance screen conducted here in the state. North Dakota does it, Nebraska does it, Minnesota does it, Iowa does it, but we need to really figure out what's going on in the state. I've collected some plants. If you saw this newsletter and you submitted plants, I truly thank you, but we're working on it, right? So right now that looks pretty doom and gloom. The same thing with the corn. Well, we're working to give you better answers. Before we go into this, excuse me, I'm gonna probably be the bearer of bad news, but mixtures are great, You know, we can reduce that selection on herbicide-resistant weeds, but the only way we stop new herbicide-resistant weeds from becoming present is to stop spraying herbicides. Started this off talking about, do we want to go back to walk-in sections? Do we want to start cultivating again? Probably not, but how else can we manage weeds while reducing selection pressure on herbicide-resistant weeds? What about non-chemical tactics? Maybe you're looking a bit perplexed. 28%? Urea ammonium nitrate? And you got a picture of soybean? Don't put nitrogen on soybean. Fix atmospheric nitrogen. What we're trying to do here is not really get our crop a boost. We're trying to use this to manipulate the weed biology and ecology. So we use that urea ammonium nitrate, nitrate being the key word. Nitrate is a known seed germination stimulant. So can we put a discriminating rate of this fertilizer out and see what rate of nitrogen we need to increase weeds? Maybe far-fetched. Well, we did it. And what we have to set this up, this is the nitrogen rate. Unfortunately, I didn't change it. That's kilograms per hectares. But it lines up very nicely. So we had 0 pounds, 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 25 pounds, and 50 pounds. On this vertical axis right here, that's just our water hemp germination. So from 0, nothing germinated, and as we increased it, that's the amount of water hemp that germinated compared to our field plots that we sprayed nothing on. This first solid line, start at 0 and go our way up, that's just pre-plant nitrogen. So as we increased our soil applied nitrogen just at 50 pounds, we got about twice as much germination. That's kind of cool. Well, when we added a herbicide in with it, oh no, this is dying, Jason. The clicker's starting to die. We'll make it through. We'll make it through. But this bottom dash line is that pre-plant nitrogen with a herbicide. Why is that important? Our pre-emergence herbicides don't kill the weed before they germinate. They kill the weed as they germinate. So if we can find, again, we add 50 pounds of nitrogen, can we kill more weeds with adding that pre-emergence herbicide? That was kind of our working theory. This is only one herbicide though. I go against my mantra, right? Mixtures, that's just S-metolachlorodual magnum. But again, we can see a significant decrease in germination when we have that pre-herbicide in with it, right? So we can kill more germinating weeds. That's good. But I like mixtures, right? Even if it's mixtures of tactics. What's something else we can do? What about row spacing? You know, where you drive down 29 or 90, you look out, probably going to be a 30-inch spacing. What if we just narrowed that up a bit, you know, from 30 to 15 inches? As these plants grow, we're going to have reduced light interception in between these row middles. What's the significance of that? Weeds need light to germinate. Okay, that's interesting. We get faster canopy closure, so we're also reducing that light that comes in, and we're minimizing those later emerging weeds that are going to not reduce yield, but produce a lot of seeds that have to be managed, right? Kind of the theme with this would be is, you know, if I came up here and said, let's buy a $250,000 piece of equipment that goes on the back of your combine, it's going to solve our problems. I'm a bit cheap. Even if I had the capital and I was farming, I probably wouldn't do that. But you talk about to a farmer or somebody that, you know, works with farmers, fertilizer is not a foreign topic, right? Everyone's pretty much set up to do it. Easily adoptable. Row spacing, maybe it's a a little bit more of a hurdle, but again, you can use a drill or anything like that. So these are easily adoptable tactics. What happens when you kind of mix all these tactics? So we have the mixture of the pre-plant nitrogen at 50 pounds per acre. We narrow up those row spacings, and we can't logically just say get rid of the herbicides, at least right now, right? But we have a strong herbicide program. 2 herbicides in the pre-application and 2 in the post. Mixtures, mixtures, mixtures. So what we did is we took this out to the field at 2 locations this past summer. And I kind of want to share all this data with you all. You're the first people that have seen it, so I'm pretty excited. Now you'll notice another thing we had to do is we had to go in the Wayback Machine. We're not set up for narrow row no-till planting. So again, we had to go back out to the shelter belt, get the chainsaw out, get us a toolbar out, and use some flexi units. So no, unfortunately, this is not under no-till conditions, but we were trying to make do with what we had. And even then, it was kind of a struggle. So the first thing I want to go over is just the water hemp germination. I'm going to set up how these graphs are going to be set up. So again, we want to see what happens when we have different row spacings. So we have wide and narrow on this bottom axis, wide being 30, narrow being 15 inch. What happens when you have the different nitrogen rates with it? Again, wide, narrow, with the 50 pounds of nitrogen. So we're trying to do a big, what we call a factorial, to look at all of these practice combinations so we can see how each one affects the other. Then next, we just have herbicides with wide and narrow. And the last 2 bars are going to be all these tactics combined. This is just going to be water hemp germination, so it's plants per square foot. Right off the bat, we see a sharp decrease. So the top 18 plants per square foot, that's going to cause a yield loss. We go from 16 plants down to about 12. So just by having those narrow row spaces, we're seeing a decrease in water hemp germination. But what was interesting is it was flipped. Once we added that nitrogen, saw an increase of water hemp germination. Probably not a surprise you don't have a herbicide versus when you apply a pre-emergence herbicide, we saw a significant decrease in water hemp germination. What I really like to point out though is, again, we have our herbicides at the wide row, about 6 plants, but we had narrow row, started to see that sharp decrease in germination again. Yeah?
Eric, were your herbicide applications made pre-plant or?
Pre-plant, yep.
Pre-plant?
Well, at planting, let's just call it at planting.
Okay.
Good question, thank you. Yeah, if there's any questions, don't hesitate to stop me. Now, I don't want to get into the post-emergence control because, we were using pretty robust programs. So when you have, something like Enlist One or Liberty applied at maximum labeled rates, you're probably not going to have any weeds. So what I want to look at is, before we went and took these soybeans to yield, look at the effect of having wide versus narrow and wide and narrow with nitrogen just on the plant size. So now it's just going to be our non-chemical tactics. What I found very interesting is it didn't really matter if we had wide or narrow rows, and this is biomass per female plant. Per female plant. So water hemp's dioecious, there's a male and a female plant. We looked at the female plant because those are what are going to produce the seeds, right? But what we saw that was interesting, and that's in grams for female, so about paper clips a gram. So there we're getting to be about 18 paper clips. That's the size of them. But kind of not a shock is what we saw when we had nitrogen with it, we had increased plant size. Okay, great. Do you think plant size tells the whole story? Remember, these are the female plants, right? These are the ones producing the seed. So does it really matter if you're a small plant? What's going to be the deciding factor of your problem of weeds next year? Seeds? So again, I don't like to show you this is what we're doing, but I am going to tell you this is what we're doing. We're quantifying the seed productions. We're collected all of these plants from the field, and now we're going into the lab with our leather gloves and cleaning it out and 1, 2, 3. We're trying to make a quantification on the seed size, but I don't think this tells the whole story. Now, having it be, kind of a farming presentation, what's the bottom line for farming, right? Is it how big the water hemp plants are, or what's the yield? I'd say it's probably the yield. Now we're going to go back to having all of our treatments on the bottom, and then we're going to have our bushels per acre on our vertical axis. Obviously with no herbicides, not great, but we're still getting a decent yield, right? Bumping it up to 20 with narrow rows, maybe a little bit more weed competition. We have these programs, 50, 55 bushels of the acre. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. But I think, this is just some preliminary data trying to show what happens with mixtures. Again, I think we need to use all the tools in the toolbox, right? We can keep using hammers that have a big effect, but how long are those hammers going to have a big effect? Start doing some of this easily adopted stuff. I think the next step, and we're doing it this year, is we hear a lot about fall planted cover crops. Before I came here, I spent time in North Carolina. After corn harvest, that happened in August, it was easy to go out and plant cereal rye. What's it like after we pick corn here? It's cold. Sometimes it's white on the ground. Sometimes that ground's frozen. But what about spring planted cover crops? Again, trying to make it easily adoptable. I'd say if you're sitting here today, you're probably down with trying these fall planted cereal rye. We're trying to get this message to everyone. And if you can't get it feasibly in the ground after corn harvest, what about planting something in the spring? Winter wheat? Okay, maybe you're thinking winter wheat. Well, it's not going to fertilize, so you're not going to have seeds produced, you're not going to have volunteers. What about oats?
Dormant seeded.
You could, but again, you're still getting pressed for time, right? If you fly it on or anything like that, but trying to make it easily adoptable for effective management tactics to complement our herbicides. And I believe I probably went over time, but wrapping this all up, I still think this is going to be the take-home message for me. This herbicide strategy point system is new and confusing, but how many points are we getting just by showing up? 5. Liberty Ultra, we need 3 points. Enlist One, we need 6. But it's not going to be difficult with the practices we're doing. So I don't think as of this year, it's really going to change what we do. But use it as an exercise. Oh, I didn't go all that long, but use this year as the primer, right? It's going to be new, it's going to be confusing, but when there's just 2 herbicides, I don't think we need to really, be the Chicken Little and saying the sky's falling. I will say, though, it is important to recognize that sharpen resistance kochia here. It's likely going to be resistant to the Valor, resistant to the sharpen. We need to start mixing up what we're doing. Didn't talk about it here, but since I got the time, there are options burned down. Paraquat, gramoxone, anybody like putting that in the sprayer? No. I've sprayed a lot of it myself, but it gets to be a little bit, dare I say, and I got some friends up in the front row, and don't take this personally, friends up in the front row, but it's also difficult with the enclosed shuttle. There's the additional training. Not saying that paraquat or gramoxone is a bad option, but there's going to be additional hurdles. There's also dicamba. We're seeing dicamba fail across the region, if you will, right? It's in North Dakota. It's probably here. I don't want to start picking out different resistances of herbicides that are not working due to resistance, but we need to know. Fall applied's still going to be really good, and I suggest we use it. Before I came here, it was a foreign thing to me. But in the southeast, where you pray it doesn't rain, let alone for rain, it makes sense using this winter precipitation to move that herbicide through the soil. But we got to use mixtures. We got to go back to what we were doing before we had the Valor, before we had the Sharpen. And I really do think the tactic mixtures are going to work. I mean, even, it wasn't as clear here with the row spacing or anything like that, but it's hard to quantify what I call these little hammers, right? So the little hammers would be the row spacing, crop rotation, cover crops. But when you start using them together, you start to see this larger effect. And what I want to do too is just repeat what we're doing and keep trying these new tactics, right? Something that maybe is a little different. Spring planted cover crops. It's easier for me to do it on a 10-foot by 40-foot long plot and see if it works and then come tell you all it works, rather than just saying, I think that'll work. You're managing a 2,000-acre farm, waste a bunch of money that may or may not work. But I think this group is a good group to bring it up to, because you're probably likely to try new things. And again, if we're going to try new things, we don't need to do it across the whole farm. When we plant any crop variety, do we plant that same one across the entire farm? I should hope the answer is no, right? But we need to treat weed management in kind of that same way. Site-specific weed management. If you know this field has these problems, maybe try some new tactics. But I know we got a little fast, unfortunately, and I apologize. But I'd be happy to answer any comments or questions before we get moving on. Yes. Pardon? So the question is, what about weed control in pastures? Kind of a broad question, I would say. But the principles used in row crop weed management, I say apply for pasture weed management as well. So do you have a specific question for pasture weed management? Pardon?
I got every weed you can talk about in those pastures, so I don't know.
So do you want to talk just specifically about leafy spurge or Canada thistle or?
That's what I'm saying, that's all there.
Right, but again, I think these principles are still going to remain the same. So do you have grazing on this
Yes,
piece of ground? Do you do rotational grazing?
yes,
Okay, do you use herbicides?
yes.
Do you use multiple herbicides? Or is it just straight Tordon? Are you just using 2,4-D ester, right? So yes, as in you use them singularly or together?
Singular.
Maybe, so what we've seen in some of our data with leafy spurge, we spray 2 quarts of 2,4-D ester. That's a half gallon. So we sprayed the leafy spurge. It died back, right? That's what we're going for. We waited 3 months later and the regrowth, because it's not the entire story of just killing the above ground vegetation, right? With leafy spurge or any of these perennial plants. But what we saw was those rhizomes, the underneath structures, regrew, and it was 5 times larger than the non-treated plant. But when you add that other herbicide in there, that regrowth starts to decline significantly.
So if you have a helicopter come in, what would you expect? What would they use?
That I can't answer, because each one is going to be maybe retailer or distributor specific. But it makes sense too, because you're going to have a helicopter cover a wide area. Maybe you can't access it. But as far as what they would spray, it's got to have that aerial label, but hopefully they would be doing mixtures, but I know some people just don't. But again, I mean, and you know, you can use mowing in pastures. If you do have Canada thistle or leafy spurge, there's the beetles that you can introduce. There's a lot of other tactics that we can use. With the rotational grazing, you know, if you have an area with a lot of weeds, maybe it was been grazed down too far. There's been a opportunity for these weeds to germinate. But again, just multiple tactics. And it doesn't matter if it's in your yard or it's in cotton in the southeast. The same principles are going to apply.
Have you got any research or done anything as far as on the cover crops, as far as weed controlling going forward, as in one more tool in the toolbox?
Great question. Question asked was, do we have any ongoing research? And I'm going to be honest with you, no. But that's why we're planning to do it this year. So we have some work that's going to be looking at the different species of cover crops. So is triticale the best? You know, cereal rye, we always talk about that being king. But what about the spring planted stuff? So we are moving forward, right? Because I can't say this in good conscience by saying, you know, this is the answer without actually doing it. Before I came to South Dakota, I was under the impression that herbicide resistance was under control, and maybe it's not. And I don't think it's anything that we've done specifically, but after you use tools over and over again, you're going to start selecting for resistant weeds. So we got to do something different, and I need to be able to have supporting data, which works the best, right? Because kind of in my mind, we just use cereal rye going forward. We use the same tactic over and over again. I don't know if we'll have resistance to it, but is there some sort of other repercussion as well? But the answer, in short, no, but we're going to start. I think we have some seeds in the ground now, and then compare it with the spring planted stuff. But good question. Any other questions? Yeah.
Can you go back to that previous slide where you started talking about rye and oats?
Yep.
And you thought you ran out of time?
Yeah.
Did you have more comments to make about that slide, I guess, what I was asking?
Well, I mean, the thing is I think one of the issues, at least maybe my preconceived notion, is our geography, and maybe it's not just Mitchell exclusive. You know, if I'm going to try to talk with somebody up by Summit, right, northeast South Dakota, try to look at what we can do, because if we're not able to get good seed to soil contact with our cereal rye, you know, whether it be just because our crop's still in the ground, we're going to fly it on, or the ground's frozen, or you just straight up run out of time, do you just throw everything out the window and give up? Or do you have that option of going in with a spring seeded cover crop, whether it be some sort of wheat or other small grain? And how does that help you? So a little bit of background on this. Colleague in western Nebraska, they use spring planted winter wheat for their cover crop at their research farm. And we were talking about this in Bennett, South Dakota, so way west South Dakota in the Badlands. And everyone, there was an audible, and he said, you know, we're not trying to get big plants. Plants like this big, you know, a couple inches tall, provides enough of a biomass and this physical barrier to impede weed germination. So just because you think cover crops are out for me, so I'm just going to not even think about it, you know, we don't need to be pushing anyone into absolutes, right? If you can't do this, here's another option. So, you know, what about the spring planted? Is that an option? My hunch is yes. But again, without actually doing it, out providing any data, it's hard to say. That's why there's that question mark, right? It's not definitive. We need to get answers so we can start pushing the needle forward for more sustainable agriculture, being how we produce things and also for our pocketbook. Yeah.
I've done dormant seeding rye on Christmas. I've even done it out. If I get a chance, we'll do it now yet.
And again, that is a viable option. I mean, if you can go and dormant seed it, that's why I'm saying I don't think we just need to just say, that's not feasible in our journey.
It won't look like much at first, but it's surprising.
Yeah, and even if you get just a little bit of biomass, I think that's what we need.
And if you're dry, like a year like this year, so some people are worried about moisture. If it's dry, you're going to be able to, in planting, that stuff isn't going to be very big.
Yeah.
You can take it out.
Yep, that's a good point. Thank you. Just talking about dormant seeding, right? Maybe it's not the most ideal time, but you go out there, get the seeds out. What's that benefit for you? But a good point. I appreciate that. Any other questions before? Are we still good on time?
How about Liberty and Resistance water hemp, that article that was out here a month ago or so?
So there has been, and I don't have anything for water hemp, but we can use this same option. So there's been Liberty Link or Liberty glufosinate resistant water hemp that's been confirmed out in Illinois. So while this is still working here in this area within reason, just showing that there's Liberty or glufosinate resistant water hemp in a state just a couple rivers away, if you will, demonstrates that this is not ironclad. Right? There's still the ability for these plants to become resistant. So if we're just going to try to rely on that one tool and think it'll be fine, that happens to the folks in the I states of the Mississippi Delta, I think that would be silly to think about. So if we look at this for water hemp across the entire United States, as far as a species as a whole, and herbicides that the plant has not evolved resistance to, there's none. It's resistant to every post chemistry as a species. Not every single population here, there, and yonder are resistant to everything. But there's a lot of 5-way, 4-way, 6-way resistant water hemp. So it's a real issue.
How long does that kosher seed stay viable in the ground?
I'm going to be honest, actually putting a year timeline on it, that I don't know. But my thing really is, something like this, where it's a little bit burnt off, expect it's going to produce seeds, and not so much what the viability, yes, the viability is going to play a role because, what you did, or if you're renting, whoever did whatever in the past is going to have implications for today. But just letting one plant go to seed, let's say even if it makes 10 seeds, your problem of one is increased tenfold for the next year. And that's just one plant. So yes, the seed viability is a real issue, but we do also need to think about what's being deposited into our soil this year that we have to manage immediately next year. But I would say, roughly 5 to 10 years, depending on the soil type.
And tillage.
And the tillage and conditions, right? So with no-till too, if we're using a tool that we're not paying for, you have that seed on the surface, a lot of carbohydrates, right? Energy source, insects, mice, birds, they consume it too. So there's a lot of inputs that go in to give a definitive, it lasts this long in the soil. But with that, again, I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak. It's been a pleasure.